Please welcome Alan, David, and Kaleem to the S4 main stage.
So we're very excited to talk to you today about SBOMs. But before we can sort of assert that they exist, we should have just a very brief discussion about, wait, hang on, what is an SBOM? And for me, it starts with a very simple question, right? We find the brand new, logoed, flashy vulnerability. How many of us can quickly and easily answer the most obvious question in the world? Am I affected? And where am I affected? This is something that we have to be able to deal with. And we think that SBOM is going to be the path to get us there. So it starts with this vision that, hey, software should be like any other market. We should have more transparency in it. Transparency drives markets. Food safety and labels, not new. We've been doing this for decades. If you're in the chemical side of things, you're very familiar with the safety data sheet. It's an ISO standard. Everyone around the world says, hey, I got a pallet of chemicals on my plant. I need to know what's in it in case it tips over. And in fact, in the hardware world, we have the idea of a BOM, right? A bill of materials, so that when you buy that 10-ton diesel generator, you have a list of every nut and every bolt so that you can perform maintenance on it. But that generator today is probably be connected to the internet. And unfortunately, you have no idea whether the IP stack means that it's built out of the freshest, healthiest ingredients, or there's something unhealthy there that could damage you and yours. So when we talk about an SBOM, it's very basic. We want to say, here's a software component, a third-party component, and here's how it relates to the other third-party components. If it's software that you wrote, that's your software. That's your proprietary information. Third-party information is the data that we're focusing on here, and the basics are saying, what is it? Where did it come from? What's its name? What's version? And a hash, so that we know that it wasn't just something that someone downloaded from GitHub. We want to be able to sufficiently identify them. And then the goal is to put them into a tree. So Acme application is built on Bingo Buffer and Bob's browser, which in turn uses Carol's compression engine. And ideally, we have some extra knowledge about what we don't know. The famous line of known unknowns. We want to make sure that when you're looking at a piece of software, you can say, okay, Carol's compression engine is a leaf in my graph. It doesn't have any further dependencies. Whereas Bingo Buffer, maybe I need to look into that. Or maybe I don't. That's entirely up to you and how you think about risk. As we think about what we want, ideally we want to go as deep as possible. I've heard someone say, I want to know what's on my network down to the sand. Lovely goal. I think we've got a few years to get there. But what we can say is everyone should be able to say, hey, here are my top level includes, and then a best faith effort to get it from upstream. And we're going to be talking about that in a moment. There are some real benefits, and I don't want to dwell on this, but one of the important things to acknowledge is when we talk about the software supply chain, many of us are in the middle, right? We both produce software, but we also get software from other people. So we need to make upstream decisions, and also there are people downstream who are depending on us. The benefits of transparency, and I'm happy to chat about this, there's some documents online that describe this, are out there. And some of them are about the benefits of being able to take action when no patch is available. So you can have non-software based mitigations when you know there's a risk. So let's take a look at the classic issue when I discover at the top here that there's a flaw discovered. So at the top of this slide, a vulnerability is discovered, which means the open source community has to fix it. And then the middleware vendor has to fix it. Then the other vendor has to fix it. It has to percolate downstream. So the asset owner doesn't even find out about it until it's come all the way downstream. Compare that to a world where we do have transparency. Everyone knows about it from time t0, which means while you're waiting for a patch to percolate down, you can take defensive measures that you see fit based on your risk modeling. And because there's some transparency, we can actually inject some incentives. We can change the economics of it. In terms of how to think about doing this, we didn't want to create a brand new standard. Fortunately, there's some existing standards out there. Happy to chat more about this afterwards. There's some documents on NTIA's website. But the overall issue is we can talk about this in SWID and SPDX, and we have the basic data today. And if you don't like these, fine. XML it, JSON it, do whatever you need to convey the data. What we've done over the past year at NTIA is not do the work ourselves, but convene. We've brought together folks from the entire supply chain, open source, middleware, commercial, and customers, and across every different sector that we can find. Because while this, we think, is critical to ICS, it isn't an ICS-specific issue. And what we don't want is to have DoD land come to you and say, yeah, please use the solution that we invented for our needs, or healthcare. It has to be something that works for all of us. So there's some resources online where you can sort of learn more about what it is and why we should do it. But today, we want to really unpack what this means for our community. So I'm really lucky today to be joined by two experts who've been thinking about software and security in the ICS space for quite some time, David and Kaleem. So let me start off by asking David, when we think about transparency, is this something that you think we need in this space?
Well, anybody who's actually taken any time to look at software or done any kind of evaluations of software, like it's where I actually started my area, was being a network administrator and evaluating software. You ended up running into some really interesting black box situations. Like one in particular case we were talking about earlier, which was we had a configuration change management piece of software that did not use agents. They don't exist anymore. And we get it into our lab, and we were under NDA to look at it. And then once we got into the lab, they were dropping randomly named long hash-like EXEs into Windows directory. And that's how they were gathering their data. When we went to them and said, that seems malicious, they said, no, we can't change the name of it. We can't sign it. No, it is randomly sized and named every single time it's ran. So then under NDA, I can't go back to the asset owner and say, hey, don't use this because of this reason. I just had to say no. And it seemed like, yeah, you're a dinosaur. We can't, you don't understand what you're doing kind of stuff. But yep, there's a lot of black box syndrome out there.
And Kaleem, are you able today to get some information about what's inside any of these black boxes? Is this something that you've asked for?
Can we get it today? No, but is that something that we've asked for? Yes.
Well, and so let's unpack that a little bit and sort of
Sure.
figure out why. So David, internally,
Yeah.
is this something that you guys think about for your software?
Well, in general, we already do it as part of our build process. So generally, when we make our own stuff, we kind of know what's in there. Maybe we don't have a full list that's customer shareable at that point, but we, as part of our build process, you better know what the libraries are there. You better have a good hash values to verify, or at least what used to be CRCs, but now hash values. When it gets checked into the library, that it maintains that level of integrity all the way through to making media at that point. It was something similar as we were talking earlier about, where 10 years ago when compliance started hitting in power generation, where my myopic view is, we started getting requests for a ports and service document, or just purely what is the ports that you're running at. And we didn't really have that information as a customer shareable item until enough customers came to us and started saying we need it for compliance reasons. So we already had that information, but it was not a nice, here's the document to use.
Well, and so let's imagine a world where folks like David could give this to you. Is that something that you would want?
Yes, the short answer is yes, absolutely. We would want an SBOM. How would we use it? I guess that's the next logical question. So there are a few use cases that I can rattle off. At the top of the list would be the configuration management analysis. The engineers can use it in the troubleshooting sessions to isolate the problems between the hardware and the software itself. Then there's system hardening. So if there are issues with certain libraries and there is some notice put out by the vendor itself, we can use that as well. And last and most important one is the vulnerability analysis.
So let's talk, because again, as I talked about earlier,
Sure.
you're not just someone who ships software.
Right.
You're someone who gets things upstream. So do you have access to the SBOMs of the components that you're using?
Normally, No. I mean, the answer is no. It's not like we have super secret sauce. Generally, we do get some, but it's going to be underneath a global kind of NDA between us and the other organization so that they give us full access to the device, but they also give us full access to their customer list, or they may give us full access to kind of business stuff and roadmaps of stuff they're working on. So we may, if we are really partnering with somebody at that point, then yeah, we might have some intimate knowledge of all the skeletons in the closet, as it were. But it goes back to his point, which what he's going to use with the SBOM right now is when we were talking earlier, which is the generally for most of my customers would be, you would hope, would take this information and say, oh, this has OpenSSL 101A in it. I need to adjust my threat models, which, everybody's doing their threat models, right? Yeah, okay. So then they have to adjust that, or they're going to do some mitigations, or change some signatures on there, or change firewall rules and such. But generally the next immediate question is, and are you going to patch it? So it becomes less of a, tell me what's in it, what's the sausage made of, and more of, are you going to maintain it, and how long are you going to maintain it, and here's the big shoe to hit you upside the head when you don't. So yeah, it's more life cycle management question to us than it would be more of a single static time snapshot.
Sure. And I think that's an important consideration, that an SBOM must be a living document. But often we think of it somewhat naively as saying, well, here's just, I have one piece of software.
Right.
Let me get what are the underlying components. But of course, you're not dealing with a single piece of software. You've got, 5, 10 different integrators, sometimes more. How does that make it more complex for you?
I think it does make it complex, but there are ways that we can actually handle that. So we can have a central team that deals with the SBOMs. And when we have different projects, or the green fields coming on, or even the brown fields, a central team that's responsible for the SBOMs itself and dealing with the different vendors, then when the new projects come along, they can go and work with that central team. So there are ways to handle that.
At that point. But most likely what you're going to end up doing is multi-hatting somebody at that point to do like just an asset inventory person. The multi-hat person who's also making coffee and making sure that everything's working right now is also the security person on plant side too. But that's the unfortunate point is that if we gave you, I'll just pick on myself, if we gave you an Ovation 3 whatever system, it's going to be a snapshot on time when I built it. Most likely I did the build process on my actual software, not when I patched it, when I made any alterations for your project, when I added more products to it. So it's going to have to be a bit of a octopus nature of a document that's going to have to be maintained by somebody. Someone's going to do the work.
No, I absolutely agree, because anytime there's a change made, for whatever reason, vulnerability or an upgrade, so all of those libraries would have to be kept up to date. The whole process of that would have to be updated.
And I think that's an important consideration, which is to say if the code changes, then the BOM has to change.
Right.
And we've got to sort of understand where that's going to fit. So first of all, I like the term SBOM squad. We're going to have to...
the bomb squad,
We're going to get T-shirts made. So, but Kaleem, you highlighted vulnerability management as sort of the core vision here. How do you see sort of the alignment? Because we're starting to touch on sort of responsibilities of who's going to be doing what. Is this the sort of thing where if you have the ability to see the underlying components, you're now going to take ownership or responsibility for monitoring this? Or is that something you're still going to expect of your supplier, your vendor?
So I think the responsibility is with both. So from the vendor perspective and the asset owner perspective. So we, as an asset owner, provide the context, because the software itself or the package itself can be deployed at many different places. In some places it would be in a secure place. Another, if it's exposed to certain elements, the context and the risk of that changes. So yes, from the vulnerability analysis perspective, when we marry the context with it, the risk would change, so that's our responsibility. But the actual disclosure of the vulnerability, so to speak, I would expect to come from the vendor, and we have to work together, and that goes with our core values of respect and inclusion. shows that we're working with the community, as opposed to if we, as the asset owner, just take that move away from it, just rely on the vendor to provide us the vulnerability information, then we're not showing any accountability towards the community.
Well, let's just be a point on that one. Some of the challenges associated with that as a project is that sometimes, as you're well aware, every project's slightly different. Not everybody can even agree on what kind of alarms they want to hear or even the graphics. Those are fundamental parts of how to do the control itself. But we end up with slightly different special snowflakes on every single job. So the issue comes into, Dave Foose has I don't know about Emerson itself, but I have no problem with the stuff we create, we're on the hook for at that point. But when we get a whole bunch of follow-on products that at sometimes when we come into at the time of FAT or SAT, and they've just yanked this piece of technology in from Nowheresville because some other group somewhere else bought it and can't wait to use it, are we on the hook for at that point to provide that as SBOM? And inevitably, the follow-on lifecycle management, which is where we would get pushback sometimes.
Well, and let's also remember that a lot of the patches would need to come from upstream for you. How does that change the dynamic?
It's fun, for lack of a better term. And we play marriage counseling on that somewhat, but generally what we do is we take the heat at that point and say, well, the patch is not available, and then you should do mitigations. Primary example right now is the OMG NSA 2020-0601 stuff, where Windows patches are out and everybody has to patch within 26 minutes to get it done because everybody's going to be hacked 6 ways to Sunday at this point. But the how fast you get that out is how fast we get it from Microsoft. Well, it's available right now. Well, then we need to patch it, and there's some logistics stuff right there. So the idea of doing the proper level testing, because right now upstream patches from stuff we don't even write could affect a myriad of the soup that is the control system at this point, and will completely make it too salty if we just take whatever's available.
I'm learning. I'm getting a lot of great metaphors.
It's mostly food-based. Yes. I'm a little bit hungry. Yeah, it's getting close.
But let's. I want to unpack that because we've talked about patching. Right. This is basic security 101. Suppose that we just had the patching sorted. Right?
Right.
Some vendor out there just says, Kaleem, I've solved your patching problems. It's perfect.
Here's my money.
Would you yes. Would you still want to see some SBOM data about the underlying dependencies and products?
Absolutely. The reason is we talked about the vulnerability analysis and the risk management. Not only that, there's a piece of inventory as well. So validation of what we have is important, but it also gives us the information of inventory for software perspective, which goes into, like I mentioned earlier, from the troubleshooting and then the vulnerability analysis and risk management. I think so, absolutely. It's not just about patching. So it is about the risk. That's the most important.
And I'll play devil's advocate because I think that's what I'm actually here for, right? Which is, if it's black box and we don't tell you about the vulnerabilities, then it's no big deal, right? Because there's no vulnerabilities being released to the wild, so you don't have anything to worry about, right?
If a shell pops in a forest.
Right, so, which we ran into situations like that before with some other black box. It seems like to me, and I feel like I'm picking on them, but security products are some of the worst because who watches the watchers are at that point. Where you find out they renamed things or they completely tell you it's an appliance, but you go underneath and it's Linux with a whole bunch of containers and everything else, flattened that hasn't been patched in 3 years and stuff like that. So they renamed OpenSSL and call it Foose SSL, and that doesn't have any bugs, but the OpenSSL does. So we run into problems where this can be challenging for a asset management capabilities, but also just purely trying to herd the cats together to get you something that you can use for threats, because some of that stuff is just not out there.
Yeah, no, it is complex, like David pointed out. It's not an easy task to do, but I think as a community, we need it, and we need to work together, and we need to resolve those issues.
So let's start talking about the mechanics.
Okay,
So,
and actually what it looks like. What is,
Yeah.
what is the granularity that you're really wanting
we've
from
got
me
the,
at this point? I need to write this down real quick.
yeah. So if we have these fields,
Yes,
and you've got your fancy looking graph,
right.
does that work for you, or do you need more?
I would ask, does that work for everybody else? Because like you were saying when you were discussing this with other people in the industry that were three-letter organization kind of level, they were looking down to the command level. I mean, is that actually good enough information to say you're using memory safe, not doing string copy on your code? Does that really help you as a defender? Kinda, sorta, maybe, I don't know. But is that information you can use for defense at that point, other than just don't buy that software? But is it down to just the library? Is it down to if I tell you it's McAfee, or maybe I tell you it's McAfee 10? Is that enough granularity for you to be okay with that? Because we already give, in industrial control, we go down to the screw with a part number on hardware, and generally when we hand you software, it does have that information of the static and snapshot in time, but at this point, it comes down to what is the next item missing that needs to give you more context and contextual awareness.
So I'm glad that you brought up that example of down to the screw level. So from the hardware perspective, if there's a vulnerability or there's a issue with a screw, we have a list. We can actually pinpoint where that screw is and how many of those are and what we need to do
And if
to
it's
mitigate
loose,
that.
if there's a screw loose.
Yeah. So well,
He's here
that
all
too.
night, folks.
Yeah. So yes, so we need that kind of granularity in the SBOM, but I would not go down to the code level that you mentioned. Obviously, if those three-letter agencies that you mentioned, they want code level, I guess they're going to come ask you. But from our perspective, from asset owner perspective, at least to the library level. And I'll take the hashes.
Right.
I'm perfectly happy with that.
And in terms of sharing it,
Yes.
you comfortable sharing this data?
Absolutely not. Wait.
Damn it, we went through this in rehearsal.
Okay, yes, I am. Wait. No, it's fortunately or unfortunately, you're being dragged kicking and screaming into the light at this point with a lot of this stuff. And what we can do is we can clean up our own house and start pressuring on our own downstream or upstream vendors at that point to get them similar information. And unfortunately, I will say it, and you can throw stuff at me right now. NERC SIP, is it the first time today? Yeah.
You're gonna throw stuff at us now.
Love or hate
Yes.
it is pushing some of this narrative forward a little bit, and we're going to need to. They're at least trying to do at least integrity checking and know where you buy stuff from and where it came and what it's made of is somewhat buried in all the contract negotiation rigmarole that we're going through at this point.
So one of the things that we've tried to do in the NTIA process is to be agnostic about how the data flows downstream. We want it to, but what that's going to look like. Are you going to publish it? Are you going to have it on a password-protected website that each of your 7,000 customers has a special password that they never share or reuse? And so one of the questions we often get is, well, you're telling people about vulnerable software. Aren't you going to give a roadmap to the attackers? And my response is, you know what, guys? It's 2020. We don't talk about attackers. We actually do a little threat model. And if someone wants to know what's in your products, they'll figure it out. We've seen a couple of great talks the last few days where smart people have done exactly that. Determined adversary, a competitor, they want to tear down. RE is not that hard. At the other end, the thing that sort of keeps me up all night is the skiddies with Metasploit and Showdown. And there, the real risk is they don't need a roadmap, but the defenders need to know where this stuff is. You need to know where these things are in your network. So that's how sort of we've thought about this trade-off.
Operationally, generally, that's been the completely evergreen complaint for decades is I don't know where my stuff is and I don't know what it is. and giving customers, I'm not even say our customers because that sounds marketing, giving customers a bit more, or at least just putting myself in your shoes, being more aware of what it is and where it's at is just fundamentally step one.
So let's talk tooling, right? So
Right.
we've got the commitment, we've got
Yep.
the budget,
Yep.
we've got a plan, maybe we've got a trusted third party that's going to handle the data for us.
Sure.
What tools, what services, what can the entrepreneurs in the audience do to both of you to generate the data and to help you use it?
Okay, so I'll ask that to you as the gentleman with the actual checkbook at this point. So, do we hand this up as just cost of doing business at this point? We have to do a snapshot in time and hand you a here's you go, sir. Good luck, God bless. Or do we provide this as a general ongoing service that we have to do? As every time we do patching, we go back and recheck it and rehash and do everything else and hand you that and good luck and God bless? Or do we actually provide it as a managed service that we come out to your facility and do that for you because every special snowflake needs its own time in the sunlight?
Okay, so the answer is yes. Well, the combination
So
of
do I send
of
the
those.
PO over now or do I?
You can send it to me. I
Okay,
just don't
yes,
have
sir.
the approval authority. I'll
That
sign
was way
it.
too easy.
So, no, I think it has to be a living process. So I think the third option that you mentioned is probably the most appealing one. How it's going to be actually paid for, I'm not smart enough to answer that question. I fully expect the asset owners to pay for it. I will just say that. I don't have the authority from BP to say, yes, we'll pay for it, but yes. But the third option that you mentioned, where it's a combination of a living process,
Sure.
that anytime a change is made, the new hash values are made available. So it continues on from there. And obviously there's costs involved with that. So yeah, as an asset owner, I expect to pay for it.
Well, let's talk about these costs.
Sure.
Because again, when I talk to some folks who come from the IT world, they're rather dismissive. They're like, come on, this is just a couple extra lines in your makefile. How hard can it be?
How hard can it be? It's because that's how easy it is because it already exists, right? So if it was so easy, then even a 6-year-old could do it. Right? I stayed at the Holiday Inn Express last night. That's why there's companies out there still selling a asset inventory for 6-figure engagements. And it's just what it is because it's hard. And again, back to each environment is going to be slightly different. Each environment, like even if I gave you an SBOM today and say, okay, here is this HMI, and it should be these hashes, and it should be this software. And then I patch, then I update my SBOM. Okay, patch 2 says it's this hashes in this software. Did you patch? I don't know. So my SBOM changed, but yours didn't. Is that going to be a complexity issue? So it goes back to now we're having drift, just like configuration drift, just like anything else, and you being aware of your threat, but utilizing my public information may not give you false senses at that point.
So we're getting the sense that this is going to be a challenge. But I sort of want to also wrap this up to say, we heard that this is something that's a priority. Just very briefly, is this the sort of thing that you're going to be looking to some of your security vendors to help you manage?
So I wouldn't say manage, but we would look for them to be able to consume this kind of information.
And I think that's going to be a big part of it. So, chance to sum up, right? The theme of S420
Yes.
is we got to look to the future. Things aren't perfect straight out of the box. I love that point that Dale made. So I'd love to just hear, if this is something that we're going to have to deal with, is this the right direction to be heading in?
Absolutely. I think we need to continue to work as a community to define the standards and the formats and iron out some of the issues that we just highlighted today. Yeah.
And if anything brand new at this point, we're going to have to look at it as a living process. Even we could living document, living process, living everything at this point. But it's going to have to get defined over time because it's going to be either required by law and standards. Anybody want another standard at this point? Or it's going to be basically a consortium of users who find the fine point where they actually get agreement, which, we can't even agree on where to get dinner at this point. So where we can actually, what an SBOM looks like and the granularity might be challenging as well.
And I think that's a great way to sum it up. which is what we are trying to help the community do. NTIA doesn't have the authority to tell anyone to do anything.
Neither do I.
But what we can do is build on the points you just said, which is we are trying to build this around the principles of rough consensus and running code. What works for the marketplace? So if you'd like to get involved, there's some information up on the slides. Our next steps, we have these basic ideas of the what, the why, the how. And now the goal is to say, how do we make this easier? How do we make this cheaper? How do we make it so that we can start to pick this up? And a year from now, we're going to have some playbooks to help you. So if you want to help, please get in touch because this is coming and we're going to need your help. So I'd like to thank David and Kaleem and thank you for your time.
Thank you.